that you might receive, or a service contract that you have clients paying into that they'll use at another time. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to use the term client retainer, but any type of prepayment from your customer will follow the same steps. So the first thing you want to do is to go to your chart of accounts and create a liability account. Again, in my example, I'm going to be using client retainer. This is going to be a liability account because it's money that you have received that you have not yet earned. Once that liability account is set up, you want to create an item that will link to that liability account. In this case, I'm using retainer. We can leave this as a service type because obviously it's not inventory. You could also use other charge if you wanted to. In my example, I'm going to be leaving it a service charge. I'm going to leave the rate at 0 because this may vary from client to client. This is non-taxable, obviously. And then the account I want to link that to is the one that I just set up called client retainer. Now that I have those two items set up, I can use them to record receiving the retainer from my client. Since the client is standing in front of me wanting to pay a retainer on his account, I'm going to create a sales receipt. A sales receipt lets you record the transaction and receive the funds in one step. Otherwise, I could create an invoice and then receive a payment against that invoice. A sales receipt is the best way to record something that is sold and the money is received in one transaction. If you're not going to be receiving the money at the time that you're creating this transaction, you can create an invoice where you record the invoice today and maybe not receive the money until another time. I'm going to select my customer that's paying me this retainer. I'm going to use the item I just set up called retainer. I'm going to use today's date. And I'm going to put in the amount of the retainer received. If I look at my liability account for client retainer, I will now see that there's $500 in this account. By opening it up, since there's only one transaction, I can see this is from Natalie Chapman. I'm going to create a few more retainers so that you'll see how this will play out if you have several. All right, I've put 3 transactions in here for retainers, and I purposefully put 2 at the same amount because as you have more and more of these retainers received, it will become confusing. I want to show you how you can later run a report to see where each of your customers stands in regards to the retainers and the balance. Now I want to create an invoice for services earned from my client. To do that, I'm going to create an invoice, or I could do a sales receipt. So this client has used $100 of the prepayment that she has made in the form of a retainer. So I'm going to record the services that have been earned, but the client does not need to pay me this $100 because she's already prepaid me a retainer. And I want the retainer to reflect that $100 has been used. So I'm going to put in the item retainer. And I'm going to do a negative 100 because we're reducing the amount of the retainer that she has prepaid. You might have an instance where a customer wants to give you a retainer but is going to use part of that retainer on the same day. To do that, you create a sales receipt. Record the retainer, record the service that she is having performed today and the amount for that service. And then we're going to record the retainer amount being used today. In this case, $150. So you'll see here at the bottom, we're only collecting $500 from this client, which is the retainer, but we're using 150 of it. Now if I look at my client retainer balance, this liability has $2,000 in it. To look at the register, I open this up, and I can see the clients that have paid in and the amounts and the money that has decreased it because the client has used up part of their services. That's what brings me to the $2,000. As you can see very quickly, this register, while it gives you a running balance, it becomes difficult to see who has the remaining retainer and who doesn't. Now my client, Natalie Chapman, has requested that the remainder of her retainer be returned to her because she's not going to use that up. To do that, we're going to write a check, enter her name, and the amount that she is owed, which I happen to know is $305. We're not using the Expenses tab. We're going to use the Items tab. We're going to select Retainer as our item and put in the $305. Now that we have several entries for retainers, you want to be able to see what your customer balances are. This is a little bit tricky to get to this report because if you go to your chart of accounts and you look at your client retainer and do a quick report there, you can sort it by name, but it doesn't give you a running balance for each individual customer. For example, Natalie, we can see very easily that she's used up all of her retainer, but Bob is $750. Well, then Middlefield Elementary is another $500, so now our running balance is $1250. So that's less than desirable for finding out a balance of your customer. The best way to get a running balance for your customer report is to go to Reports and pull up a balance sheet. From here, go down to the Client Retainer field and double-click to drill down into this detail. Once you're here, make sure your dates are set to All Dates and then Total by Customer. And this will give you the running balance by customer so that we can see that Natalie Chapman has used up all of her retainer because we sent her a check for the balance. Bob still has $750, Middlefield Elementary has $500, and Tracy has a balance of $350. Once you have this report run one time, I suggest memorizing it. You might want to clean this up by getting rid of some of these columns. To modify this, removing columns that aren't necessary for you, choose Customize Report. Select the columns you wish to remove. Once this report is reflecting the changes that you want, you can choose Memorize. Give it a unique name, save it in a group if you'd like to, and then click OK. Now that your report is saved, you can easily go to your Memorized Reports, select the report, and see your running balances by customer.